All right, man. Peace. You know what, brothers? Gregg Popovich is one of the characters sprinkled around the entertainment world. In this case, the sports sphere of the entertainment world, that I like to refer to as a quote-unquote person of interest. What I mean by that is that it's very clear to me that he has a role within his role. That he's basically playing a character within his role as a coach in the NBA. And there are a lot of notable figures dispersed throughout the entertainment world that are just conduits or agents for quote-unquote change, i.e. chaos. And I mentioned them previously on this channel. People like Gregg Popovich, Jay-Z, Steve Kerr, LeBron, etc. They're all just different branches on the same tree. They're trying to push for socialism, discordianism, i.e. Luciferianism. That's why you'll always see them jump up for any type of liberal reform. They're pro-homosexual, they're pro-transgender. They're pretty much pro-everything and anti-nothing other than being anti-male hegemony. And it's because they're playing a role. They have a part to play. They're basically like worker bees. Now, Gregg Popovich, for those of you who don't know, his official history notes his associations with the CIA. He went to espionage school, and supposedly, allegedly, he decided not to join the CIA, but I doubt it. I doubt it. To be quite frank with you, I believe that he's someone who was basically planted into the NBA to just dwell there, and when his time came, he would make certain statements to help push certain reforms. And that's the only thing that makes sense to me in regards to why a basketball coach would be advocating for the U.S. government to quote-unquote revisit the Second Amendment. I mean, what is there to talk about? What is there to talk about the Second Amendment? The Second Amendment was created for citizens to protect themselves against the possibility of their government turning against them. That's what it was created for, bottom line. So obviously, as the technology of warfare advances, the technology of the citizens has to advance. So of course, people are not going to dwell at home with a musket anymore to protect themselves against the redcoats or against the Continental Army. Yes, they are going to have certain quote-unquote semi-automatic. Let me say this quickly. I had a lot of people jumping in my channel, jumping in my comments, I should say, after the video that I made about the hashtag Never Again movement. People, oh man, you normally are so careful with your words. Why'd you say machine gun as opposed to... Look, my channel's not for all that circular political bullshit talk. They're coming for all your guns. Okay? And when you utilize bump stocks, all that does is turn a semi-automatic into a machine gun. So a lot of you guys like to play with words. And to be quite frank with you, I'm pretty sure that it's some of the Caucasians who come on my channel, because you guys are the ones that like to complain and nitpick about silly shit like that about your guns. My channel's geared towards the so-called black man. I'm not concerned with all that silly shit. For the most part, this society's circling the drain anyway. It is what it is. But to get back to Popovich, yes, he's a tool. And you're going to hear him make more and more liberal statements as his tenure with the San Antonio Spurs, where he's been firmly planted and strategically planted, starts to dwindle down and come to an end. And he's going to transfer a lot of his energy over to Steve Kerr, that other asset. But anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
The Spurs, who were in the nation's capital yesterday for a matchup against the Wizards, used their downtime to take in the sights of D.C., which included a tour of the Supreme Court. Coach Gregg Popovich, who's never afraid to weigh in on controversial issues, took the opportunity to voice his opinion on the gun control debate. He said, even if they change the age limit, it's all a Band-Aid.
Now, keep in mind, Gregg Popovich was at least allegedly a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. So it's interesting to me that he's trying to take this hardline stance against guns, quote unquote. He, of all people, should understand the potentiality for a government to turn against its citizens.
Band-Aid. The obvious elephant in the room is the guns, weapons of war, and the magazines. The real discussion should be about the Second Amendment. Is it useful?
Once again, look at what he said. Is it useful? So he's not an advocate of taking away access to semi-automatic rifles or AR-15s or whatever particularities some of you guys out there, or some of you gun aficionados, you try to make these distinctions. They're coming for the Second Amendment, meaning they want you to not be able to have a gun, period. Okay? They want you to put all your trust into your local police force. That's what it's really about. And everybody knows that this issue, this conversation is circular. It's really never going to come to an end. So why would he make a statement like this unless he is an agent of discord, an agent of chaos? Why would he do that? And you have this former Supreme Court judge, I believe his name is John Paul Stevens, who also is an advocate for repealing the Second Amendment. What are they really saying? Brothers have to understand something. In the aftermath of World War II, some of your higher level Nazi strategists were taken out of Germany. It was known as Operation Paperclip and Operation Rat Run, and engrafted into the inner fabric of the American government. Some of them were taken down into South America, into Chile, Argentina, Brazil, to perfect a lot of the scientific processes that they were working on over in Germany. Nazis were way, way, way ahead of their time. The vast majority of the technology that we use today was implemented by them, created by them, perfected by them during the 1940s and in the aftermath of the 1940s. The CIA was totally reformulated based off of how the SS was run. Why do I bring that up? Because the way that the Nazis were able to round up the citizens and throw them into concentration camps was because they were disarmed. Okay? Why do I say that? Do I say that because I'm trying to get in on the so-called gun debate? No, I'm not. I could care less. To me, common sense is never a debate. It's never a debate. I'll make my statements so that the so-called black man can understand what's happening around him. Okay? That's why I make some of these videos. That's why I make these statements. Certain people say, why do you use sports as a backdrop? I use whatever I like as a backdrop. There's certain things that I like to watch that I'm interested in, and I'm always going to do me. Period. But anyway, let's see what else Mr. Gregg Popovich has to say.
Useful. Does it serve its purpose the way it was supposed to do in the beginning? That discussion should be had.
In other words, Gregg Popovich is trying to say there's no more reason for the American citizens to be cognizant of the potentiality of its government turning against them, which is inherently disingenuous and dishonest. But it's something that you would expect from someone who is working for an intelligence agency. It's something that you would expect from someone with espionage training. One of the first things that intelligence agents learn is how to bring about confusion within an environment.
For more on Popovich, here's First Take.
Victoria, thank you. So as you just heard, Gregg Popovich obviously has his Spurs in 6th place in the West and only 2.5 games ahead of the 9th place team, but he's still got time to talk about what's going on in our country.
Yes, isn't that interesting? This is a person who allegedly is fighting for a playoff spot and is spending most of his time trying to mentally manipulate Kawhi Leonard. But he has time to talk about how the Second Amendment should be repealed. He's a coach in Texas, which is a hotbed for gun ownership. So clearly, he must have something on the owner of the San Antonio Spurs that he's not worried about losing his job.
He's saying it's time to take a look at the Second Amendment. Stephen A., how should ownership feel about Popovich's outspokenness?
It clearly doesn't matter how they feel. Because if it mattered how they felt, he wouldn't feel like he has carte blanche to say what he feels like saying.
Well, normally, you would sit up there and say, or in the case of Gregg Popovich, the fact is Peter Holt shouldn't feel anything. Gregg Popovich has taken this team to the postseason 19 consecutive years. He's got 5 championships. If anybody's earned the cachet to say what he feels, particularly of such a serious matter and something that's near and dear to his heart as a former military man, then obviously Gregg Popovich, above most, has earned the right to do just that. So certainly I totally understand it, and I certainly would never say anything to the contrary.
Well, one would think that as a former military man, allegedly anyway, someone who's gone overseas and should have an essential and a very thorough understanding of what causes most wars, which is the people being discontented by its government and the government trying to maintain its power over its own people, that he would be in favor of the Second Amendment and be able to expound and explain about why it's relevant and why it would be relevant for perpetuity.
But it's because it's Gregg Popovich, and I think that's the important point to bring up here. If this were a coach that did not achieve what Gregg Popovich has achieved, or to a lesser degree, what Steve Kerr has achieved, and instead they were so outspoken about these issues, but we're struggling, I would have a problem with it. Because if I'm an owner, just like it pertains to a player, I want to know that you're focused and you're handling the things that you can control and the things that your responsibility, your occupational responsibilities entail.
So in other words, Stephen A. Smith, you do have an objection to what Popovich said, but you know that you really can't say anything because once again, Gregg Popovich has, he's put on a pedestal in the sports world where he's basically untouchable. No one can say anything about him. So Stephen A. Smith couched his true feelings in some form of a fake narrative or an illusion where if it was the case that the Spurs were struggling, then this is how I would feel. In other words, that's how you really feel. You just don't want to say it point blank.
And the willingness to speak out so often or what have you would be problematic for me if you were not handling your business.
Well, for all intents and purposes, they're not handling their business this season because they're struggling. No, I expect them to make the playoffs. But for a team that's in sixth and is floating around the area where they still have not quite cemented where they want to be yet, you would think that he would be a little bit more reticent to run his mouth unless that's his priority.
Because just this willingness to speak out about it would not be acceptable to me. But in the case of Gregg Popovich, people like that who handle their business and handle their priorities and clearly have proven this such, I have no issue with it whatsoever.
Greg?
Well, what do you think about what he said, Stephen A. Smith? I noticed that you have not made any type of assertion based off of what he said.
Gregg Popovich is one of the great leaders in America today. I mean, both as the head of that organization that has had kind of really over the last several decades unparalleled excellence when you consider they're in the mix every single year. They don't take a break.
So Gregg Popovich is one of the great leaders in America today because he's able to win a basketball championship. That's interesting. Or is it because he's an advocate of discordianism, i.e. superliberalism, much like you, Max Kellerman? And he's ardently against Donald Trump.
And he speaks out about important issues. You know, the NBA is riding high by letting people speak. Unlike the NFL, they try to muzzle. The NBA is letting people speak. And Popovich, by the way, speaks for the majority of Americans if you look at the polling.
Oh, does he? He speaks for the majority of Americans. That's interesting. According to what polls? Polls can say whatever you want them to say.
Polling on these issues. And the fact that he is a West Point guy, former military guy, 5 years active duty in the Air Force, can't be, accused of being some snowflake, as they say, right?
Oh, no, I would never accuse him of being a snowflake. As a matter of fact, I would accuse him of being very much mentally tough as part of his training, as it is being able to dispense thoughts to the masses. Intellectual warfare is the key warfare. Propaganda is how you break people down mentally, psychologically, before you break them down physically. So he's just engaging in what he's been trained to do.
Who's going to say that about Popovich? He is showing real leadership. And you never want to sound condescending or patronizing towards athletes, or certainly not coaches.
Yes, and we know how Gregg Popovich, he never sounds patronizing or condescending. Ever. Not in his post-game press conferences, not in his sideline interviews. He never sounds patronizing or condescending. Not good old Greg.
Who are much more accomplished than you and also your elders, but you feel proud. He makes you proud. Not only of him, but to be an American. And so all those things are true. Now, it is also true that he has never been more outspoken about more high-profile issues than he has been this year. And that coincides with the Spurs' roughest year under his tenure. But of course, correlation does not equal causality. But as Stephen A. points out, some may raise an eyebrow. Wait, are you really focusing on basketball? To that, I would say that if I had a vote, it would go to Gregg Popovich as Coach of the Year. Forget about everything off the court of play, right? Off the field.
No, sir. The Coach of the Year is Brad Stevens of the Boston Celtics, and it's not particularly close. It's not particularly close, sir.
Off the field of play, off the court. Gregg Popovich, this season, Stephen A. Smith, without Kawhi Leonard. Everyone else is over 100 years old on the team who used to be really good. The young players are useful but not great. This guy, with LaMarcus Aldridge, who's now hurt, as his best player, no one else averaging 30 freaking minutes a game, has his team in the playoffs in the Western Conference. This might be his greatest coaching job yet.
Popovich is a great coach. He's a great coach. He understands the NBA game extremely well. And what he understands best of all is that the vast majority of NBA teams do not know how to play team basketball. If you know how to play team basketball, you'll make it to the playoffs no matter who's on your squad, as long as you have relatively decent NBA talent. Relatively decent. If Gregg Popovich had the Phoenix Suns, he could get them to the playoffs just because not even so much how great he is, but the simple fact that most of the other coaches in the NBA, number one, are not that good. Number two, have a hard time getting the players to listen to them. Popovich knows how to make people listen to him. It's part of creating a cult of personality, which he's done extremely well. He's tried to court LeBron James by speaking to him on the woke wavelength. But I think that he's kind of given up on that because I think that he understands that the LeBron James system, the LeBron James cult of personality, will be combative with his own. But we'll see what happens in the offseason, especially if things blow up with the Kawhi Leonard experiment.
So I hear what you're saying. When you haven't had the kind of success, you don't have the kind of equity Popovich has, to kind of take the courageous stance he's taken and to show real leadership.
No, he's not taking any courageous stance. The last athlete to truly take a courageous stand was Muhammad Ali. He truly took a courageous stand because he was actually going against the tide of the mass media. That's why I will always give him an exceptional level of credit for the stand that he took. He showed great courage. He showed great courage because he actually went against the tide, the flow of the media. There's nothing courageous about what LeBron has done or Gregg Popovich or any of these other plants in the sports world who are trying to promote the agenda either of a certain agency, in the case of Gregg Popovich, or in the case of a corporation like a LeBron James. LeBron literally has strings hanging out of his back because everything that he says is at the behest of Nike and their interest. And Popovich is very clear to me what's going on with him. He's part of the agenda to disempower the quote-unquote American citizens, i.e. the debt slaves. I mean, why would you make a statement like that? And you're a military man, allegedly. You should be familiar with what goes on abroad with people who have been disempowered and disarmed. That's a signal to the government to truly oppress them. Part of the checks and balances of America is that the people actually have a right to defend themselves and govern themselves, at least in principle. In principle. Not really in fact anymore, but at one time in principle. That is the essential aspect of a republic, which really hasn't been in effect for, probably about 150 years. But that was the concept behind which the Luciferian founding fathers of America set it up.
Particularly in this season where they're struggling, maybe some people are looking, but I would argue he is doing his best coaching job, and Stephen A. Smith, the equity he's built, the excellence of the Spurs organization is a reflection of just this kind of leadership he's showing now.
I would tell you, number one, he would be fourth on my list. Mike D'Antoni would get Coach of the Year. If he didn't get it, I would look at Nate McMillan in Indiana, probably Dwayne Casey in Toronto before Nate McMillan, and then Gregg Popovich would come into the equation.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, I'm not quite sure what you're smoking, sir. I'm not quite sure what you're smoking. All those coaches that you named have done a very good job, but they all pale in comparison to what Brad Stevens has done. They truly do. They pale in comparison to what Brad Stevens has done. If before the season, I would tell you that Gordon Hayward was going to go down in the first game of the season with a horrific foot injury, ankle injury, and that Kyrie Irving would miss in the vicinity of 25 games during the regular season, and they will still win well over 50 games, you would say Brad Stevens must have been the coach of the year. That's why I have to give it to him. Now, the Spurs are going to win somewhere around 50 games while missing Kawhi Leonard for the vast majority of the season. But they've had veterans to lead them. The Boston Celtics, their prime veteran has been Al Horford, and even he's missed time. They've had issues with Marcus Smart. He's had a lot of female problems that they've tried to hide. Kyrie, of course, who's been injury prone throughout his career, he's seen his knee injury problem crop back up once again. Of course, the almost tragic injury that Jaylen Brown suffered. Fortunately for him, he's ended up being okay. The ups and downs of Jason Tatum. There's no doubt in my mind that Brad Stevens is the coach of the year, but there are certainly other noteworthy candidates.
That's number one. Number two, the other thing I think it's important to point out about what Gregg Popovich has said, and what I loved about this, it's been real easy and obviously apropos in the eyes of millions upon millions of Americans to go after the president. Gregg Popovich didn't do that here.
Yes, but he's gone after him repeatedly throughout the season.
He talked about other politicians who are elected officials, who have a responsibility to be cognizant of what's going on in the real world and to make sure that policies that are legislated and implemented take those things into consideration for the betterment of our society.
Well, really what Popovich is doing is he's jumping on the pseudo-revolution that's being led by the adolescents. Right? America is now engineering society to be led by children because it's telling you that as an adult, you have no more respect. Just like years ago, they told heterosexual men, you get no more respect. We're transitioning all power and say so over to women and homosexuals and lesbians. And now they're moving towards children. And I've always noted this dynamic, and I've told brothers about this for years. You'll notice that in the same way that the man has been disempowered and the female has been allowed to wantonly disrespect him, in the same way, the child is now allowed to wantonly disrespect their mother. That's why you'll notice when many of these single mothers' children get to be 12, 13 years old, when they hit puberty, they start to rebel. And the woman has to deal with the same level of vitriol and disrespect from the child that she was so willing to give to her child's father, her boyfriend, her husband. So that's what happens when you throw chaos into the chain of command. It affects everything. But when you're an agent of chaos, like the average female is, they don't grasp how the energy that they emit is going to come back onto them. So point being is this: they're transferring all of the power and the say-so over to children now. So Popovich wants to jump on that train and utilize it to attack these congressmen. They're trying to pressure them to do something, anything about the Second Amendment so that they can go into their next phase.
It's not just on the president who only gets to sign bills that are brought to his desk. It's up to those politicians on Capitol Hill, 435 congressmen, 100 senators. It's their responsibility to make sure that they legislate and assist in implementing policy that assist our country in a very positive fashion. Gregg Popovich, when he brought up the issue of the Second Amendment, pointed to them and the importance of them doing their job. And what I like about that is the fact that we've spent so much time focused on the president. We've let a whole lot of other politicians off the hook that have not stepped up and have done their job, no matter.
Well, that's kind of a loaded statement because so-called black people have let quote-unquote elected officials get away with a lot of things for decades. The number one thing that so-called black people have done is not understood the role of the politician. The role of the politician is to represent your interests. I'll say it again. The role of a politician is to represent your interests, not for them to get quote unquote elected and then you hope that they do what you hoped that they promised they would do. Because sometimes they don't even promise you. You just hope that they promise you certain things, because so-called black people are always looking for politicians to save them. That's never supposed to be the condition of the relationship between the citizen and the politician. The politician is supposed to act as a liaison between the community and the governing body. He's supposed to represent the interests of the people at large. You're never supposed to be in a position where you hope that they do what's best for you. Never. So-called black people do not understand the job of a politician. You know why? Because our people don't have a ruling class mentality. Once again, you're supposed to raise up your politician from their youth, and you tell them this is what you're going to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to be disenfranchised and exposed. Period.
No matter what your position is, ideologically or politically, I'm talking about doing something. I'm not saying what shouldn't be done. I'm talking about doing something to address the issues that are pertinent.
Well, that's normal for a blowhard. No disrespect, Stephen A. Smith. You're not going to talk about what should or shouldn't be done, but just do something. Well, anybody can just do something. What does that even mean? Just do something. No, as a man, you're supposed to say, here's what needs to be done. Boom, boom, boom. Like I can say, here's what needs to be done about the Second Amendment. Nothing. What needs to be looked at and understood is the importance of quote unquote mental health. What needs to be looked at is the prevalence of psychological manipulation on the masses and many of these sleeper agents out here. Because there are many of them floating around out here.
In our society, those folks up on Capitol Hill haven't been doing that. We've got governors who've been doing it. But we've had mayors that have been doing it.
Like who?
We've had the local elected officials that have been doing it. But our senators and congressmen up on Capitol Hill have not. And Popovich pointed that out. And I appreciate that.
Well, he has not scapegoated. When he's gone after the president, he's done so for good reason that he's articulated. And he's not looking to scapegoat anyone. He makes comments about issues that are important. At times he feels they're important. When in the past...
Allegedly, he feels they're important. Allegedly.
In the past, many in his position have been silent, and he has done an amazing job on and off the court this season. And even if the Spurs were to not make the playoffs, and you could correlate his outspokenness with the first time they wouldn't make the playoffs, that would be coincidence and bad luck.
I wouldn't call it bad luck. I would call it divine providence.
Well said, guys. We will leave it there. They were the big three.
Yes, we'll leave it there. Gregg Popovich, being a quote-unquote person of interest, at least on my list, is somebody to watch. All right? He's certainly someone to watch. His connections to me, I won't call necessarily insidious, but suspicious. But anyway, brother, stay vigilant. Peace.